Imagine one of Hollywood's most famously private and calm stars sitting across from Joy Behar on The View. And suddenly, a routine interview turns into a serious disagreement. Keanu Reeves has spent decades building a reputation for being thoughtful, respectful, and remarkably private. Joy Behar, meanwhile, is known for asking direct questions and challenging her guests when she disagrees with them. Put those two personalities together, and the conversation can take an unexpected turn. The central issue is simple. How much skepticism is fair when discussing someone's public image? Joy questions whether Keanu's reputation for kindness is completely genuine. Keanu doesn't respond with anger or try to avoid the question. Instead, he calmly challenges the assumption behind it. What follows is a conversation about kindness, fame, criticism, and whether being skeptical of everyone can sometimes go too far. And as the disagreement grows, the balance of the interview begins to change. Joy keeps pressing for answers, while Keanu remains composed and turns the discussion back toward the assumptions being made about him. By the time the conversation reaches its breaking point, the question is no longer simply whether Keanu Reeves is really as kind as people believe. It's whether kindness can remain strength when someone is determined to question it. For decades, Keanu Reeves has maintained an unusual position in Hollywood. He became one of the industry's biggest stars without appearing to chase attention, controversy, or constant publicity. From Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure to The Matrix and the John Wick franchise, his career has remained remarkably successful, yet his public image has stayed relatively simple. A talented actor who prefers to let his work speak for itself. That image of humility and kindness has followed him throughout his career. Stories about his generosity and respectful treatment of other people have become an important part of how audiences see him. Joy Behar represents a very different approach to celebrity interviews. As a longtime host of The View, she has built a reputation for being direct, outspoken, and willing to challenge guests when she believes their answers deserve closer examination. So when Keanu sits down with the panel, the conversation initially appears straightforward. The hosts discuss his career, his projects, and the experience of remaining successful in Hollywood for so many years. But eventually, Joy turns the discussion towards something more personal. Keanu's reputation for being the nice guy of Hollywood. Is that reputation simply who he is, or could there be more behind the public image? That question changes the tone of the interview. Keanu doesn't become defensive. Instead, he takes a moment to consider what Joy is asking and begins examining the assumption behind her question. What follows becomes a broader discussion about fame, public perception, kindness, and the tendency to assume that every positive action must have a hidden reason. And from that point forward, the interview takes a direction neither side initially expected. The conversation begins on a relaxed note. Keanu Reeves is welcomed to The View, and the atmosphere is friendly as the hosts discuss his long career in Hollywood. Whoopi Goldberg greets him warmly, while Sarah Haynes starts with questions about his work and the experience of continuing to take on demanding roles after so many years in the industry. Keanu responds in his usual understated way. Rather than presenting himself as someone extraordinary, he gives credit to the people around him. When the discussion turns to action films and the physical preparation required for them, he explains that training and teamwork are a major part of the process. The audience responds positively. For many viewers, Keanu represents a familiar kind of Hollywood success. Someone who became internationally famous while generally maintaining a private and low-key public life. The conversation continues with questions about his recent projects and his experiences working with directors, actors, and stunt teams. Keanu speaks respectfully about the people he has worked with and avoids turning the discussion into a celebration of himself. Everything appears to be going smoothly. But while the other hosts continue with relatively comfortable questions, Joy Behar remains noticeably quieter. She listens, occasionally glancing at her notes, waiting for an opportunity to enter the conversation. Then Joy finally speaks. Instead of asking Keanu about another movie or his career, she decides to address something much more personal. The reputation he has developed for being one of Hollywood's nicest stars. And with that question, the tone of the interview begins to change. Joy Behar's question immediately changes the direction of the conversation. Instead of continuing to discuss Keanu's movies, she focuses on the public image that has followed him for years. She points to the stories people often hear about his generosity, his respectful behavior toward other people, and his reputation for being unusually considerate for someone at his level of fame. Then she raises a simple but challenging question. How much of that image is genuine? Joy suggests that Hollywood is an industry where public perception matters. Actors, celebrities, and entertainers often have teams managing their careers and helping shape the way audiences see them. From that perspective, she wonders whether Keanu's reputation as the nice guy could also be part of his public image. The question creates a noticeable pause. Keanu doesn't immediately argue with her. He listens carefully, appearing more interested in understanding the question than defending himself. Then he asks a straightforward question of his own. What makes you think it's an act? The response changes the atmosphere because Keanu isn't rejecting the question. He's asking Joy to explain the assumption behind it. Joy continues, pointing out that very few people remain consistently generous and humble while living under the intense attention that comes with Hollywood success. Keanu listens again. He doesn't raise his voice or criticize her personally. Instead, he begins separating two different ideas: having a public reputation and deliberately creating a false personality. For him, the fact that people have noticed his kindness doesn't necessarily mean the kindness was performed for attention. And as Joy prepares to continue, it becomes clear that the discussion is no longer about his latest project. It is about whether the person audiences believe they know is actually the person Keanu has always been. Joy doesn't let the subject go. She argues that Hollywood is built around appearances, and celebrities often have carefully managed public images. From her perspective, someone who is constantly described as kind and generous deserves to be questioned just like anyone else. Keanu listens without interrupting. Joy then asks why audiences should automatically believe the stories they hear about him. If someone has spent decades in an industry where reputation can affect careers, she suggests, isn't it possible that being known as the nice guy could also be useful? The question is direct, but Keanu doesn't respond defensively. Instead, he considers it for a moment and points out that there is an important difference between having a positive reputation and deliberately creating one for personal gain. He explains that people may notice certain things about the way he treats others, but that doesn't mean those actions were planned as part of a strategy. Joy remains skeptical. She argues that public figures are rarely as simple as they appear. People have motivations, businesses have interests, and celebrities understand that their behavior can influence how audiences see them. Keanu agrees that public images can be carefully managed. But then he asks a different question. If someone helps another person without expecting anything in return, does the existence of a public reputation automatically make that kindness less genuine? The question causes a brief pause. Keanu isn't claiming to be perfect. He isn't asking anyone to believe that every story about him is true. His point is simply that skepticism should not automatically become an accusation. The conversation begins moving away from Keanu's image and towards something deeper. Why do people sometimes find it easier to believe that kindness must have a hidden motive than to accept that someone might simply choose to treat others well? And that is where the discussion begins to become much more personal. The conversation becomes more serious when Joy continues questioning why Keanu places so much importance on kindness. Keanu explains that his perspective didn't come from Hollywood or from trying to create a particular public image. It developed through his experiences in life and the people he has met along the way. He talks about how success can change a person's circumstances, but it doesn't necessarily change what matters most. Money, recognition, and professional achievements can disappear quickly, while the way people treat one another can have a much longer impact. Keanu says that he has learned to appreciate simple acts of consideration. Listening when someone needs to be heard, treating members of a crew with respect, thanking people for their work, or helping when he may not seem important from the outside. But to the person receiving that kindness, it can mean much more. Joy listens carefully, still appearing unconvinced. Keanu then explains that he doesn't believe kindness makes someone perfect. Everyone makes mistakes, including him. Being compassionate doesn't mean ignoring problems or pretending that difficult situations don't exist. It simply means choosing not to make the world harder for another person when there is no reason to do so. He also points out that people often remember how they were treated long after they forget the details of a particular conversation. That idea becomes central to his explanation. If someone has the opportunity to make another person's day easier, even in a small way, Keanu believes there is value in doing it without expecting recognition. Joy's original question was about whether his kindness is an act. But Keanu's answer suggests something different. For him, kindness isn't a strategy or a reputation. It's a choice he continues to make because life has taught him how important that choice can be. Joy Behar is not completely satisfied with Keanu's explanation. She acknowledges that his perspective sounds sincere, but she returns to the reality of the entertainment industry. Hollywood, she argues, is not known for being simple or forgiving. Careers are built around reputation, competition, publicity, and business decisions. Celebrities know that audiences form opinions about them, and those opinions can have real consequences. So Joy asks why Keanu should be treated differently. She suggests that even if some of his actions are genuine, it is still reasonable to question how much of the public image has been shaped over the years. Keanu doesn't reject the idea that skepticism has a place. Instead, he makes an important distinction. He agrees that people should think critically about public figures. Nobody should automatically believe everything they hear simply because a celebrity has a positive reputation. But he questions whether skepticism should always begin with the assumption that someone is pretending. Joy responds that she isn't accusing him of doing anything wrong. She says she's simply asking the questions that viewers might be thinking. Keanu listens and then asks whether there is a difference between asking a difficult question and deciding what the answer must be before the person has even responded. That question creates another pause. Joy has spent years challenging celebrities, and she clearly believes that questioning public figures is part of her responsibility. Keanu isn't asking her to stop asking difficult questions. He's asking her to consider what happens when skepticism becomes so strong that genuine kindness is automatically treated as suspicious. The disagreement is now clear. Joy believes caution protects people from being fooled. Keanu believes constant suspicion can prevent people from recognizing something genuine. Neither has raised their voice. But the conversation has become much more serious than it was when the interview began. At this point, Keanu begins asking questions of his own. Instead of continuing to explain why he behaves the way he does, he asks Joy why kindness immediately makes her suspicious. He acknowledges that celebrities sometimes create carefully managed public images. He also accepts that viewers have every right to question public figures and look beyond what they see on television. But he argues that there is a difference between healthy skepticism and assuming that a person's good intentions must have a hidden motive. Joy maintains that she is simply being realistic. Keanu considers that answer, and then asks what realism means if it requires people to expect the worst from others before giving them a chance. The question changes the balance of the conversation. Until this point, Joy has been questioning Keanu. Now Keanu is asking her to examine the assumptions behind those questions. He explains that people can become so focused on finding dishonesty that they stop recognizing genuine behavior when they encounter it. Someone can be imperfect and still be sincere. Someone can have a public reputation and still act out of genuine concern for others. Joy tries to bring the conversation back to Hollywood. She points out that the industry has plenty of examples of celebrities whose public images turned out to be very different from their private behavior. Keanu agrees, but he says those examples don't prove that everyone with a positive reputation is pretending. The studio becomes quieter as the discussion develops. Keanu remains calm, but his responses are becoming more direct. He isn't trying to prove that he's better than Joy. He's challenging one specific idea, that kindness should automatically be viewed with suspicion. And now the question hanging over the interview is no longer whether Keanu can defend his reputation. It's whether Joy's skepticism has gone too far. The conversation reaches a more serious stage when Keanu begins addressing not just Joy's questions, but the way those questions are being asked. He explains that challenging a public figure is completely fair. Celebrities should be able to answer difficult questions, especially when their actions affect how the public understands them. But he believes there is an important difference between asking for the truth and assuming that someone is dishonest before hearing the answer. Joy pushes back. She says that asking uncomfortable questions is part of her role. Viewers don't need another interview where a celebrity is simply praised. They need someone willing to question the public image. Keanu agrees with part of her argument. Then he calmly asks what the purpose of a difficult question should be. If the purpose is to understand the truth, he says, then the person being questioned should have a genuine opportunity to explain themselves. But if the purpose is simply to prove that the guest must be hiding something, then the conversation has already reached a conclusion before it begins. Joy insists that she is not trying to attack him personally. Keanu responds that he isn't accusing her of having bad intentions either. He's simply pointing out that repeatedly treating kindness as suspicious can create an unfair picture of someone. The other hosts listen closely. Keanu remains composed, but his message is now much more direct. He tells Joy that he can accept criticism. He can accept difficult questions. What he finds difficult to understand is why an act of kindness must automatically be treated as evidence of manipulation. The tension in the studio grows. Joy has challenged Keanu's reputation. Now Keanu is challenging the reasoning behind her challenge. And for the first time, the interview feels less like a celebrity Q&A and more like a serious debate about how people choose to judge one another. The disagreement becomes more difficult to control as Joy continues defending her position. She argues that people in the public should expect criticism. Keanu is one of the most recognizable actors in the world, she points out, and with that level of fame comes public examination. Keanu doesn't disagree. He says that criticism is part of being famous and that he has experienced plenty of it throughout his career. But then he makes a distinction that changes the tone of the discussion. Criticism, he explains, should be based on something a person has actually done. It should not begin with the assumption that someone's good intentions are automatically false. Joy becomes increasingly frustrated with the direction of the conversation. She insists that she is only being skeptical. Keanu remains calm and asks whether skepticism can sometimes become a habit that prevents people from seeing anything positive. He then makes the discussion broader. When people constantly assume that everyone has an angle, he says, they can begin to treat genuine kindness as something suspicious. Eventually, helping others becomes harder to believe than selfishness. The studio grows quiet. Keanu isn't speaking angrily, but his words are becoming increasingly direct. He tells Joy that he doesn't expect everyone to trust him simply because he has a good reputation. Trust should come from a person's actions over time. But he also believes people deserve to be judged fairly. Joy appears frustrated by the answer because Keanu isn't giving her the defensive reaction she may have expected. Instead, every attempt to challenge him leads to another calm explanation. Then Keanu asks one final question. If someone chooses to help another person without asking for anything in return, why should the first assumption be that they're pretending? That question leaves the conversation at a difficult point. Joy has challenged Keanu's public image. Keanu has now challenged the assumption that made her question it in the first place. And the tension in the studio is becoming impossible to ignore. The conversation reaches its most tense moment when Joy makes it clear that she no longer agrees with the direction of the discussion. She maintains that she was simply doing her job by questioning Keanu's public image. Keanu doesn't argue with that. He tells her that difficult questions are fair and that he has no problem being challenged. But he adds that disagreement doesn't require either person to become disrespectful. The exchange continues for another moment, with Joy defending her skepticism and Keanu explaining why he believes people should be given a fair chance before their motives are questioned. Eventually, Joy decides to step away from the conversation. She rises from her chair and indicates that she needs a moment. The studio becomes quiet. Keanu remains seated. He doesn't celebrate the moment or respond with anger. He simply watches as Joy leaves the immediate discussion. The other hosts appear uncertain about what to say next. Whoopi tries to keep the program moving, but the atmosphere has clearly changed. What began as a discussion about Keanu's reputation has turned into a much broader disagreement about criticism, trust, and the way public figures are judged. For Keanu, the important part isn't that Joy walked away. It's what the conversation revealed. He believes that standing up for yourself doesn't require shouting or insulting another person. Sometimes it means calmly explaining where you disagree and refusing to allow someone else's assumptions to define you. As the studio settles, attention turns back to Keanu. He has remained composed throughout the entire exchange. And now he has an opportunity to decide what to say next. Rather than using the moment to attack Joy, he chooses to address the viewers watching at home. His message is not about winning an argument. It's about what people should do when their kindness is questioned. With Joy having stepped away from the discussion, the atmosphere in the studio remains tense. The other hosts are unsure how to continue, but Keanu doesn't use the moment to criticize her or claim that he has won the argument. Instead, he asks if he can say something directly to the audience. Keanu explains that many people have experienced the same kind of doubt in their own lives. Sometimes a person helps someone, shows compassion, or simply tries to treat others with respect, only to be told that their intentions must be selfish. He says that people shouldn't allow those comments to completely change the way they behave. Being kind doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean trusting everyone or ignoring legitimate criticism. It simply means choosing to treat other people with consideration when you have the opportunity to do so. Keanu then returns to the point that started the entire disagreement. If someone believes that every good action must have a hidden motive, that belief may say more about their own view of the world than about the person they're judging. He encourages viewers not to become cynical simply because they encounter people who are. There will always be criticism, he says. There will always be people who question your motives. But that doesn't mean you have to abandon your values. The studio gradually becomes quieter as he speaks. His final message is straightforward. Kindness and strength are not opposites. A person can stand up for themselves without humiliating someone else. They can disagree without becoming cruel. And they can remain compassionate without allowing others to take advantage of them. Keanu finishes by reminding the audience that choosing kindness is not about creating a perfect image. It's simply about deciding what kind of person you want to be. By the end of the conversation, the disagreement between Keanu Reeves and Behar has become about much more than a single question. It has raised a bigger issue about how we judge people, especially those who live in the public eye. Skepticism has its place, and celebrities should not be protected from difficult questions. But there is also a difference between asking questions and assuming that someone must have bad intentions simply because their behavior seems unusually positive. Keanu's response throughout the discussion remains consistent. He doesn't claim to be perfect, and he doesn't ask anyone to accept every story told about him. Instead, he argues that people should be judged by their actions and given a fair opportunity to explain themselves. That may be the most important part of the entire conversation. Walking away from an argument isn't always a sign of defeat, just as staying calm isn't a sign of weakness. Sometimes the strongest response is simply refusing to become as angry as the person challenging you. Whether you agree with Keanu or Joy, the discussion leaves one question worth considering. Do we sometimes become so skeptical that we stop recognizing genuine kindness when we see it? What do you think? Did Keanu handle the disagreement the right way, or should he have responded differently? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more celebrity conversations, unexpected moments, and discussions that make you look at familiar stories from a different perspective.